Thanks, Dave. It is good to see everyone here tonight. And for those of us who are watching probably through the week online, it's good to have you with us as well, and hope that there's something really valuable that you might take away from our talk this evening. So, where do we start? Last weekend there were a group of guys from Maitland Baptist Church that did a bit of a four-wheel drive expedition up around Glenbourne Dam and up over the top of Barrington Tops and back home. And one of the guys, and I have kind of foreshadowed to him that I'm going to talk about him a bit tonight, one of the guys that came with us was Ian Rugrock, and Ian's sitting over here with his family. He's a lovely guy. But what I've come to understand and appreciate about Ian since I've got to know him is he's a guy that does everything fast. And I think his family would probably agree with this. Like, he rides motorbikes fast, he drives boats fast, he drives cars fast. Everything he does is done at speed. And, well, when you put him in a convoy, like a four-wheel drive convoy, you put him out in front and he's so quick nobody can find him. And so if you put him in front, he's going too fast and you can't keep up with him. And if you put him behind you, you can't drive fast enough because he's right on your hammer. So he's just one of these guys. But he said to me, he said over the radio, I made some comment about his speed on the weekend, and he said something quite profound. And if I can get this up, here's what it was. He said, "Haven't you heard, Punchy, life's a race? Haven't you heard, Punchy, life's a race?" So I've immortalised that. We've put Ian Rugrock, 11th of the 7th, 2020. You'll be famous for this one day, Ian. And he had no idea what I'd be speaking on today, but I thought what a great way to introduce this idea that we are running a race. So let's have a look at our passage, and it's found in Hebrews chapter 12. And it reads, "Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you won't grow weary and lose heart." What a great passage, and it's built around this image of running a race. But if you're like me, I'm not one of these really competitive people. I'm certainly not built for speed, and I've never been a hugely great sportsman. So I wanted to sort of create a bit of a picture for you that kind of says the same thing, but we take a bit out of a sporting theme, and I've used my family as an example. So these are images of my daughter and her husband and her 3 kids that live in Tibooburra. Now, for you who don't know where Tibooburra is, it's right in the northwestern corner of New South Wales. It's about 2 days' drive for us mere mortals. For Ian, he'd probably do it in 1 day, but it's a long way away. And so for us, for Sheree and I to prepare to go and see these guys, it actually takes a fair bit has got to happen. So first of all, we can only go when we can cobble about a week together. Because by the time you allow for 2 days out, 2 days back, 3 days is about where you want to be in terms of having some time with it. So we've got to find a week, book that out, organise work. Then, if you're like my wife, she then begins to accumulate all this stuff. So there'll be a room in the house where this pile starts to grow of all the things that she wants to take out to Colleen and the kids. Because they're remote, they can't get access to a lot of the stuff that we do. So a lot has to come out with it. So this pile begins to grow. Because we split our trip, we got a motel to book. We've got a car to make sure I've got tyres checked, I've got the oil checked. So it actually takes quite a lot of planning to actually make the drive out there. Then when you get going, you've got to put up with the very long kilometres of not much in between different places. So we've got to know off heart now every destination and every stop along the way and the distance between the towns. We could peel them off by memory now. And you've got that, and you've got the sore butt from sitting on the seat for a long time, and you've got the kangaroos that you're trying to constantly contend with that are on the road. The bottom line is it takes a lot of effort, a lot of planning to get to see our family. And if we could capture Hebrews 12 in I guess a different kind of way, it's about this. You'll put in all the hard work, you'll do whatever it takes if something matters enough to you. So you'll put in all the hard work, you'll do whatever it takes if something matters enough to you. And because this thing at the end for us is having relationship and time with our family that we don't get to see that often, that's our goal. And we're going to get there, and there's going to be very little that's going to get in the way of that. So let's just go back to our passage very quickly and explain the context that Hebrews 12 is happening in. And if you go back a little bit further in Hebrews, you'll see that the church, even though the church is growing significantly, it's under extreme persecution. People are losing their homes, people are being jailed, people are being flogged, people are losing their life. It's a really, really tough time for the church. And so the writer of Hebrews understands this and is trying to communicate to the church, look, you guys are going through tough times, but God is bigger than this, and please hang on. He's encouraging them to hang on. And the passage talks about this great cloud of witnesses. And so he says, there've been all these people in biblical history, all these people of great faith that have gone before you. Abraham, Moses, and the list goes on. And he says these people have lived through these horrendous times, and yet they've hung on to their faith, and they're enjoying the rewards of that faith because they're living in the presence of God. And they're kind of cheering you on. They know what you're going through, and they're cheering you on. So that's the kind of context in which this book, or which this passage is written. So we wanted to break it down and look at kind of three things. So a race has kind of a start, and then it has a middle bit, and it has an end bit. So we're going to look at it in those three sections. So let's look at this idea of starting well in our race of faith. And the first thing we need to understand is what are we running for? And we need to embrace that thing. So what is it? What is the goal at the end that the writer of Hebrews is talking about? Well, it's this. It's about maturity of character that reflects the character of Jesus. It's about maturing our own character to reflect the character of Jesus. And our race is, at its very core, it's about spiritual transformation that impacts every part of our lives, every part of who we are. It's about the extent to which we let go of ourselves and allow God's Spirit to change us into something new. And we see that in Romans 12, and Paul writes this thing about, don't conform to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll know what God's will is for you. It's about transformation. So our goal, transformation and relationship with Jesus. Starting well means to be ready, to be prepared. And when we read the passage, it starts off by saying, let's throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. You can't be expected to win a long-distance race when you're carrying a heavy load. Now, David and Julie Guy this weekend have just run a 25k cross-country competition at Cancross, which is up near Port Macquarie. These guys know what it means to run. And if you've ever looked at the physique of a long-distance runner, there's some pretty obvious things that you'll pick up, and it's probably, they look very opposite to me. They're very, very lean. They're very thin. And the whole idea of this is basically about physics, is they're going to burn less energy because they're carrying less weight, they're carrying less load. So their body's conditioned over a long period of time to be able to do these distances. So they wear light clothing and they wear light shoes, and they carry just enough water but not too much. So weight is really, really important. And the thing is, we can't begin to run a race, particularly the race of faith as followers of Jesus, when we hang on to the weight of sin. So to begin the race is to understand that we are broken people. We're broken people. And Jesus died in our place to lift the weight of sin. To lift the weight of sin from us and give us His Holy Spirit to make us a new creation. We don't have to carry around the guilt, the depression, and the feeling of hopelessness that goes hand in hand with the sin we carry. All this stuff is weight, and it's going to slow us down, and it's going to prevent us from getting us to the place where Jesus wants us to be. The other thing we need to do, if we're going to be prepared for the race, is we have to train. Now, I would be a peanut if I turned up to the Cairncross marathon today and expected to run, or half marathon, and run 25 Ks. I wouldn't make the first 100 metres. The reasons are obvious. I'm not built for speed, and I haven't trained. I'm carrying too much weight. I've not been conditioned. And I haven't done the work. I've not prepared. And in the same way, I can't expect to finish the race of faith unless I'm intentional about staying in and building on my relationship with Jesus Christ. Like all relationships, it takes work. And I heard a quote this week, or saw a quote on Facebook, and it said to be a follower of Jesus is to take up our cross, not lie on our couch. So we don't earn our salvation. That's a gift of God, but we do work out our salvation. We have to respond to what Jesus has done to us, done for us. We also have to be prepared by understanding what the race is going to cost us. And to ask ourselves the questions about whether or not we're prepared to make the sacrifices necessary to be a great runner. It requires time and energy, a willingness to tolerate and push through pain, and a willingness to miss out sometimes on the things that we see so many others enjoy. It takes a willingness to push back against a culture when it's exerting all of its force on you to conform and behave in a particular way. And that way usually revolves around self rather than God. So it's very important, be prepared and know what the race is going to cost you. The third thing here is know the course you're on. What does the course look like? So the race that we participate in is not a 100-metre sprint. It's a cross-country marathon. We've got to look at our faith as being about the long game, because it is. It's about the long game. And a cross-country course is often going to include a whole heap of different types of terrain, from really steep hills and rocky slopes, perhaps sand, perhaps creek crossings. It's going to contain a whole lot of obstacles that we're going to have to try and navigate around. The runner seldom looks at the course and predicts that it's going to be an easy run. Runners expect and train for a difficult course. They expect and train for a difficult course. And so as followers of Jesus, we need to have realistic expectations of what the road ahead will look like. And Jesus tells us a bit about this when we look at Matthew chapter 7. He says, "Wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." There's a lot in that. The track that we're going to run is not necessarily going to be easy. There are times when it's going to be hard. It's narrow. And Jesus says again, "I'm the way, the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me." And while the world's going to tell you there's a million ways to please God, the reality is there's not a million ways to please God. Not anything goes. And most of us would know people who have walked away from their faith. They may have started out, they may have even started out strong, but they haven't had the staying power needed to finish it. And they've often been derailed because they've had an unrealistic expectation of what, or picture in their minds of what the road ahead will look like for them. And God doesn't promise us an easy journey of faith, and He doesn't even promise that that journey is going to be a safe one. And quite the opposite, God gives us the heads up that we're going to go through trials, really tough experiences. But that through these things, He will be with us, and He'll be developing us and growing us into mature people that are a reflection of who He is. You know, each of our paths is different. We've got different personalities, different strengths and weaknesses, different things to do, different places to be, different relationships to have. But our faith also has something in common. It's a narrow path that challenges, that promises challenges and dangers and stresses and pain. Yet at the same time, it promises growth and joy along the way. And real life is found as we follow the narrow path. So what are some of the challenges that we face along the way? They're different for all of us, and they change across time. You know, for myself, as a young man, and still this thing comes back to get me sometimes, is these feelings of insecurity and anxiety. Am I good enough? And often I find I get driven, not because... not for any other reason than I think, I've just got to prove I'm good enough. You know, and that stuff it can be a real heavy weight to carry. And sometimes I think I've dealt with that, and then I've got to get back on top of that. God doesn't want me to carry that. So these types of things, they're our mountains to climb and our valleys that we need to pass through. But like David tells us in Psalm 23, that beautiful psalm, we'll also have these moments of peace and joy as God makes us lie down in green pastures and leads us beside still waters. So a hard road, but with moments of blessing and joy mixed into all that. And that's what grows us and develops us. So God never said that the journey would be easy, but He did say that the arrival would be worthwhile. Great quote from Max Lucado there. So the middle bit of the race is about running well. Now, if we're going to run well, we have to run with endurance, commitment, and discipline. Now, you've got to want to be in the race in the first place. In order to run well, you've got to want to be in the race in the first place. Otherwise, you're going to lack that core motivation that's needed for you to be able to complete it. And like we said before, you'll only commit to something, you'll only make something a priority. You'll only put in the hard work if it's important enough to you. So the question for us is this: is Jesus important enough to you? Is He important enough to you that you would commit your whole life to following Him? Is Jesus important enough to you that you would make living His way your highest priority? Is Jesus so important to you that nothing would ever convince you that there was another way to live or another person to live for? Is Jesus important enough for you? And Paul says in Corinthians, run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. So we need to be motivated to be in the race. There's an amazing prize waiting at the end of it for us. The other thing that we really need is discipline. Now I'm going to say something, you have to catch this. A good runner needs to be disciplined in the disciplines. You get that? A good runner needs to be disciplined in the disciplines. There are things that a good runner needs to continually be on top of. Diet, exercise, stretching, getting enough rest, spending time with his coach in training, refining and improving his technique. If he's going to win the race, he's got to be on top of all these things. They're not negotiable. They're the disciplines that the runner needs if he's and their routines and patterns that he's going to have to hold on to if he's going to run the race well. And it's the same in our journey of faith. We won't run well if we fail to hold on to those essential practices that are necessary to grow our faith and build an intimate relationship with Jesus. So meditating on God's word, reading it, meditating on it, praying, spending time with other followers of Jesus are vital. But equally important is working out our faith in serving others that are in need and speaking to others about the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. What God pours into us, we must let flow out of us as we love others. It's not always easy, and it takes dedication and discipline, but it's something that we need to follow through with if we're going to run well. We need to run with focus. We need to be discerning about those things that are going to pull us off course, those things that will distract us from the main thing. A sure thing about living in a modern world is that there's going to be a million distractions, some subtle and not so subtle, that are going to try and pull us off course, try to pull us off the narrow path that Jesus calls us to. At best, you'll figure this out quickly and you'll ask God to help you make a bit of a course correction to get back on track. But at worst, we'll end up compromising to the point where navigating our way back to the Jesus path becomes just too hard. And remember here that while the message of Hebrews has an application to how you and I live as individuals, how we live out our faith as individuals, the writer wants to communicate to us also that there's a corporate or collective responsibility for us. For those who are part of God's church, we should hold strong to the uncompromising convictions of our faith and stand ready to defend the good news of Jesus in thoughtful and constructive ways when we need to. Authentic faith should be grounded in who Jesus Christ is and what he's done for us, and in genuinely asking God to reveal his truth. Even where that truth might conflict with a preconceived idea that we've got about God, we need to be continually asking God to move above that and across that and show us his truth. In Galatians, the writer says, "You are running a good race. Who cutting on you to keep you from obeying the truth? That kind of persuasion does not come from the one who calls you." So the writer of Galatians is saying, you guys really need to be aware that there's going to be all these kind of temptations and all these distractions that are going to try and pull you off course. So you need to stay on point. And just to give you an idea about this idea of discipline and focus, I asked a question the other day. I said, look, you're in this race, and obviously it's about running against the clock. It's all about making the best time. What do you do when you've got to go to the toilet? Now, that's a pretty obvious thing, and they kind of smiled at me. And it was like, well, it depends. And I'm like, depends on what? And it's like, well, at different points they've got toilets set up that you can use, but if there's a big queue, you're not going to affect your time too much by going to the toilet. And so I said, so what do you do? Well, you go to the toilet. And it's like, so these guys are so committed and so focused, and Guy, you looking at me like you know a bit about this. These guys are so committed and so focused that they will soil themselves in a run because that's what it takes to get the best time. I personally would never do that. But these guys, that's how serious they are. And that's the kind of focus that God is calling us to. So let's have a look at the next one. Run with a team. Run well with a team. So our participation in the race involves this idea of corporate responsibility as well as personal responsibility. Yes, I am responsible for my own relationship and my own walk with Jesus. But in another sense, that particular walk is intimately tied with how I'm prepared to help other people along the line with me, across the line with me. The type of race that we're in is special. It involves us running for ourselves, but we will never get to the end unless we're prepared to help others get to the finish line alongside us. It's a race where we support and encourage each other and hold one another to account to reach the same goal, and that is Christ-like character. So we encourage one another and we hold one another to account. A guy that used to come here some years ago, he painted a bit of a picture for me, which I've never forgotten. And he said, Punchy, it's like this. If you were out walking and you saw a runner and he's running flat stick and he's heading for a cliff and he doesn't know it's there, he said, what are you going to yell out to that guy? Are you going to say, hey mate, love your tracksuit? No, he's not going to say that. What will he say? He'll say, mate, there's a cliff there. Turn around, stop. You're in peril. This is not going to end well. And sometimes as a church, we need to understand that we have to say sometimes tough things, but in love, because they come from a place of care and concern. To let somebody run off a cliff or to run into peril is not kind. It's not loving. And we need to find ways in really caring, in a caring sense, to be able to hold one another to account, correct one another. It's a really important aspect of running with a team. And we see in Hebrews chapter 10, where again the writer says, and let's hold unswervingly to the hope that we profess, for he who is promised is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another all the more as the day is approaching. So God's He's an expectation on us that we're going to be helping one another in community, that we're going to be there for each other. So very quickly, we'll have a look at the last part of the race, the bit where it ends. And the first thing that's important here is that we should be ending with nothing left in the tank. We need to get to the finish line and have nothing left in the tank. In Matthew, Jesus himself says, well, you probably know it. What does he say? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. So what's the picture we see Jesus painting here? It's the picture of being 100% completely and totally sold out for God. A no compromising, I'm in boots and all kind of faith. That kind of commitment to Jesus. And we see this idea coming again through Revelations chapter 7, where we read, I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot or cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. Again, what's the picture God's creating here? It's fairly plain, is that God wants followers of Jesus who have a boiling faith. Followers who have a boiling, no compromising, sold out, 100% commitment faith to Jesus. He wants people chasing after him. And a good runner knows that he's run his best when he has nothing left in the tank. Whether he wins or not, he can know that he's still run well if he can say, I did my absolute best. I ran my hardest. And you and I, we don't want to get to the end of our lives having run only half a race. We don't want to look back at missed opportunities and say, oh man, I wish I'd done this particular thing, or I wish I hadn't done that, or I wish I'd made better opportunity of that situation, or shared myself more openly with this person or that person. Wouldn't it be great if our tanks were empty? If we could genuinely say that we have given everything for the one who gave everything for us. We need to run it. We need to run and have an empty tank at the end of the day. And finally, we need to end with a great legacy. You know, that God is more interested in who we're becoming rather than what we do. It's important to understand rather than what we do. The what we do will look after itself if our focus is on developing a Christ-like character. We don't have to worry about what we do. It'll fall into place. So let me ask you these questions. When you die, what do you think you'll be remembered for? What is it about you that will have had the most meaning to the people that you've interacted with over the course of your life? Is it your bank balance, the house you live in, the car you drive, the high-level job you've had, or the fact that you've won accolades as a sports person? Those things might be remembered for a while, but they'll eventually fade. And it's things like strength of character, your integrity and fairness, the kindness and care you showed, the time you gave, the generosity and compassion you shared with others, and the patience you displayed and the sacrifices you made. These are the things that will live on in others well after you've left the world. They're the things that will live on in others. So the whole point of running well is to end well. And end well we can. God has given us the gift of the Holy Spirit to equip us for all things. We're not doing this on our own. The Holy Spirit lives within us, helps us to grow, it helps us to grow into people whose lives are a living worship to our great God. Our lives should be that living worship to our great God, that sacrifice, living sacrifice that Paul calls us to in Romans. So I just want to encourage you guys this week to think about those three things. You know, if you're new to your faith, are you starting well? Are you starting well? You know, and if you're not new to your faith and you feel like you haven't started well, then talk to God about it. Talk to God about it and say, man, I'm holding on to stuff here that I shouldn't. It's weighing me down, God. I know there's no freedom and life and joy in this place in my heart, and I need to surrender it to you. So God's there for you in that space, and He'll offer His forgiveness and His peace and His comfort. You've just got to ask Him and be genuine in your asking. And then, you know, are we running well? It's always good to ask questions. Are we running well? And then in running well, it's great to have that vision. It's always great to look at the end and say, wow, what would I like my life to be like in the end? What are the things that I would love my church, my friends, my family to remember about me when I'm gone? Help me to run that way. Help me to run that way. So just have a think about those things. And for those of you who are in Connect groups, we've got a series of questions here that are sort of bundled around those three themes. So starting well, running well, and ending well. So I'd encourage you to have a look at those questions this week, and I'll make sure these questions are posted on our letter that goes out. It'll go out either Monday or Tuesday, so if you'd like to get access to them that way, you can if you're on our email list. So I trust tonight's been a bit of an encouragement to you. That was certainly my prayer for you tonight, and thanks, Jeremy.